its value in real time, all on the app. Check it out. We made it for you, from me to you, with love. Okay, jumping into the regularly scheduled program. Viewer wrist shots number 1, Marco B and his Patek Aquanaut join us from the temple. That's not the Temple of Poseidon. I would say that's a bit of apostasy. I'm going to have to pour libations to the god. All right, Poseidon, there we are. The Temple of Poseidon in Sunio, Greece. Looking good, Marco. Jeff R. from Mexico with his Rolex Chocolate Daytona on a rubber B strap. Looking good. Love those aqua blue waves and white sand with the chocolate Daytona ceramic bezel, and yes, a rubber B strap. That is not the Oyster Flex. Mosso R hits the road with his IWC Portuguese annual calendar. We do not see this model too often, and he is on the road with a Stingray strap, which I love to see. Fun fact, Stingray often used on sliders for Moto Grand Prix armor. We have Marcus G, a good friend and a former collector conversation, as well as a member of the Talking Time with Tim Mosso Facebook group. For Father's Day, from his son of sorts, he received the Rolex Green Submariner from Claudius the pug. That is one hell of a pug. My pug doesn't do that. And then Ryan S. of LA pays his respects to the Alamo in Texas with his Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. That is outside of the Alamo. Send your wrist shots to Monday Mailbag at thewatchbox.com to see your pieces on my pixels. By the way, guys, it's a lot harder than you think to keep up and like throw up these images. Sid is a trooper back there. I salute him for tackling a very big audiovisual challenge. Jumping into our folks and friends, Miroslav joining us with Auntie Q and Richard Combs from South Florida, a longtime viewer. Soterios P joining in from Greece. We actually have some Greece in at least our wrist shots tonight. And a comment on my hair. It's true, I've come to realize that I do maybe 2 haircuts a year. So my hair goes from super high and tight to almost hippie, and then I cut it down again. Like if you were looking to make a wig and you needed a donor, you would basically just schedule me 2 times a year for the 2 pounds of hair that comes off my head. All right, Curtis Arndt, our friend and all-time most viewed collector conversation from San Diego. Time Hill and Richard T, welcome dudes. All right, so here's the thing. Rolex is changing before our eyes. I don't often talk about Rolex, at least not by YouTube standards. It's a common topic, but it's not one I like to harp on repetitively unless I have something new to say. And this year, a lot is new. First, look at the world we're living in. A lot's changing, and not just Rolex. These are interesting times. Self-aware AI seems like it's only months away at this point. The US government is releasing Pentagon-verified videos of UFOs and leaving open-ended what they may be. And Ferrari now makes an SUV. That's a UFO. Guys, amid all of this, Rolex, once the definition of the stodgy establishment, is showing an appetite for experimentation and risk unlike anything we've seen from this brand since at least the 1950s. Tonight, we take stock of key 2023 Rolex models and some of the sea change moments of the last year, and that is the last year dating back to this time in 2022. Changes? Oh yes, many. How about lefty GMTs? This seemed like the kind of thing that maybe Tudor would do, but not Rolex. Certainly not with a core canonical model like the GMT, the Daytona, or the Sub. Now I'm wondering whether we're going to get lefty versions of all 3 of them. Not only a lefty, but the first ever green bezel GMT and green 24-hour hand. That was a big leap, or at least we thought it was until later in 2022 when we got the Deepsea Challenge, a 50 millimeter exclamation mark. Titanium, 11,000 meter diver that could literally bottom out at the deepest part of the ocean. And by the way, bottom out your budget at $25,950. I've seen one of these things in real life. It does exist. You can see it on my Instagram, and somehow the dude actually managed to pull it off. But between the size, the rarity, the niche application, the price, and the fact that it was Rolex's first ever full titanium watch and a November release, this thing came out of nowhere. And this also proves that in the absence of Baselworld, the craziest Rolex watch could launch at any time on the calendar, and maybe that's the idea. Also, titanium, not 1 but 2. No sooner did we see the first than we saw the second. Earlier this year, we get a 42 millimeter full bracelet, grade 5 titanium, and it's a Yacht Master, by the way. All right, $14,050, a fair price for an unprecedented watch with a genuinely different, all matte, all masked out look. This thing is murdered to a T. There's very little gloss on this watch. Bezel insert, dial, bracelet, clasp, case, super slick. This is one for like a Cal look hot rod. And this is sober, but we also have crazy. Sober to silly with the celebration dials. I call them the Dippin' Dot dials if you're familiar with the nitrogen frozen US ice creams. And then the emoji dials, which I have to admit I really like. This is hugely polarizing and people will all but come to blows over this at watch events. But I think it's fun and I applaud Rolex for being willing to take some risks. Plus, it could have been much worse. There we go, that's where we want the emoji movie. Assuming we want the emoji movie anywhere. All right, enough of that. Paul Newman revival. People asked for years whether Rolex would ever bring back the Singer exotic dials from the 1960s and 70s, and the answer is they haven't. Not exactly, not completely, but they have brought back the minute counters, the constant seconds, and the hour counters from those so-called Paul Newman dials, back with a vengeance for the 100th anniversary of the 24 Hours of Le Mans just last week. And a vintage Cosmograph tribute, no less. You can see right there an actual 6239, that was the first generation Paul Newman. Again, they didn't bring back the whole dial, but they brought back the most charismatic and recognizable part of it. And we'll talk a bit more about this a little bit later. Display casebacks. We first saw them in 2005 on the Cellini Prince. They're back this year on a couple of different models across the line. In this case, only precious metal, at least so far. And we get new finishing refinements. I don't know if we can go full screen with that, Sid, but we've got a movement that's actually designed for a caseback now. They're putting Geneva waves on the bridges. They have a display caseback skeletonized rotor. They have little golden chaton style pivots for the jewels. All of which is to say they're really thinking now about how Rolex movements look, not just to the eye of the watchmaker, but to the customer. And this was a big step forward on, at least initially, the platinum Rolex Daytona. More on that in a moment again. And certified pre-owned, this is a big one because it's two things. First, it's Rolex deciding that it's going to own the certified pre-owned space. The Rolex aftermarket is huge. It includes hundreds of millions of watches, I'm sure, at this point. And it's important to remember that aftermarket Rolex is sometimes the most dynamic part of the market because Rolex controls its authorized dealers. They don't mark up, they don't mark down, they sell for exactly list. But we know that used Rolex watches often sell for a lot more than new Rolex watches. So this is not just Rolex saying we back our watches even on the second, third, fourth, and so on owners. This is Rolex saying that we're going to allow dealers to charge market prices on Rolex watches that are at least 3 years old or older, and that's a big change, especially with the big three, the GMT, the Daytona, and the Sub. More than the certification and the warranty that comes with it, and the idea of Rolex getting into pre-owned like Mercedes or BMW. It's this whole idea of an authorized dealer being allowed to set market pricing that really made this newsworthy. It started small, in December of 2022, 6 nations in Europe, exclusively at first through Bucherer, but since May here in the United States, it's expanded nationally, and I expect we're going to continue to see a global rollout as this program evolves. And again, there is a 3-year minimum, so the idea there is to discourage the guy from flipping his watch, I don't know, 2 days later after he takes delivery, which was a smart move by Rolex to control the impulse to get that aftermarket price. It does have to be at least 3 years old, and it'll carry a 2-year warranty, which coming from Rolex means quite a lot. That's going to carry the weight of a factory warranty. Plus, Rolex has also moved into full-blown restoration, and this is really fascinating to me because what we're looking at here is craft art. There's a Rolex 722, which is a highly evolved version of a Valjoux 72. This whole atelier thing, first a watch has to be accepted for Rolex Restoration Atelier. And once it is, they're going to document everything. They're going to verify that the watch is factory correct. They're going to find out when it was made, how it was made. They're going to make sure that everything necessary to bring it back to 1955, 1965, 1975 spec is ready and waiting to go. That includes replacing ordinarily unreplaceable individual links in a clapped out, overstretched bracelet, or refashioning components to be historically correct like the clasp. All of this is documented before and after in a wonderful book that comes with the Rolex Atelier boxed set accompanying the restored watch. This is all done by hand using original 50s, 60s, 70s methodology that would have been employed originally, sometimes even more manual than those original methods. And if Rolex can work like this on an individual watch basis, using traditional watchmaking craft, you wonder what could they do if they took these restoration crafts and the associated craftsmen and decided to do, I don't know, horlogerie, hand finishing, marquetry, miniature painting, movements finished like Patek Philippe. In a world where Rolex is already doing this, it's easy to imagine Rolex also doing that. Now, before we let our imaginations run wild, let's see what you guys are saying in the box here. All right, Brick Lane's in the box. Jim Millett, we've got Whole Milk saying, Reuter looking good on your wrist. I do have my Dan Reuter right here with a strap he sent me. Piece from a good friend and a real rising watchmaker. You'll hear more from Dan in the future. I've seen his second generation watch. It's got handmade engine turned dials and a hand finished La Joux column wheel automatic chronograph movement. Look forward to Dan's next watch. It's going to make a mark. We've got Mohammed A joining in from Bahrain. Thank you for staying up super late with me to watch the show. And then we have Dealer Ignition saying Rolex trying to discredit the fakes and capitalize on what owners want. And I would say, yeah, on both counts. What else is going on in the box? We got Brian S. joining in from Nashville, Tennessee. Eric Nielsen from Asheville, North Carolina. A wonderful place to visit and live. Dark Star would have been killer if they wrote Le Mans on the dial of the new Daytona instead of Daytona. Whew. Would I have loved to see that? By the way, I called the shot. Earlier in the year, I talked about a resurrection of the Rolex Le Mans, and it actually happened. Maybe not with the label on the dial, but in all but name, definitely. I'm particularly proud of that one. James C. saying, give me a handmade guilloche dial from Rolex, I'm sold. And you know where they could really use that? On the new Perpetual 1908 dress watch, because that thing is the definition of anodyne. Guilloche dial, please. Okay. We have Ozabad Puzzle Watch 1 year run. I like that idea. I like the idea of making it exclusive and special and not allowing it to become mundane, banal, or common. We got Dr. TikTok joining in live for the first time in a while. And Dirk D, good to see you, Dirk. All right, we have Mark S. making a tongue-in-cheek comment about our own Mike Manjos. By the way, Market Wrap is back. You can see it on Watchbox Studios. All right, let's check out some wrist shots. Number 2, I asked you, answered. Aaron S. leading off from Texas. Wearing that Dan Reuter DR02 we talked about, driving his Tesla. That is the Talking Time with Tim Mosso Facebook group 2022 watch. And it is an exact version of the one I have, right down to the royal blue and the signal green on dial and strap. You know I love to see our group watch out there. Philip M. captures a spectacular waterfall with his Omega Seamaster Aquaterra in Costa Rica. We love these exotic places. You guys photograph. Thomas B. of Liverpool, England shares his Cartier Santos green on a sunny summer day, or I guess late spring day. Eduardo R. of Long Beach, California appreciates his Zinn 756 duo chronograph diapol with Naya the Doberman. And we have Jens F. and his Omega Speedmaster, who is at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, live and in person. Absolutely awesome. Send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com to see your wrist on my list. Okay, Rolex is changing before our eyes. Let's talk about the 2023 lineup highlights. 2023 Rolex Daytona. We're celebrating now 60 years of the Rolex Daytona. And it has been redesigned in ways that are subtle. Why? Because you don't mess with success. I would argue that among the big three, the GMT, the Sub, and the Daytona has changed the least since it became 40 millimeters automatic winding and a chronometer across the board back in 1988. Since then, very little has changed. To the point that if you were to take a steel Daytona today and compare it to one from '88, the main difference would be the ceramic bezel. So that stability means you have to respect what works, but Rolex still made some changes. So there's some changes to the dial, little detail changes like the Rolex crown down at 6 o'clock, some changes to the hands, the indices, the printing, tiny things, tough to spot. The bezel does change, the most obvious change being that there's now a metallic flange around the outside of it, and we now get a display case back on a white gold model, more on that in a moment, and the platinum model that you see right here. So, the 2023 Le Mans. It's worth mentioning that the Daytona, well, that's it. That's the new watch for 2023. The Daytona was originally called the Rolex Le Mans when it launched in 1963. And they even went out and memorialized this in advertising to prove that while the watch itself may not have made it to market, they definitely decided to call it the Le Mans early on. They even published this bizarre ad with an inverted picture of the watch. But that was the original nomenclature. Was it too French? Who knows? But they quickly decided that Daytona was a better pitch for a racing-oriented chronograph watch for the American market. Now, the new Le Mans from 2023, if we could jump back to the picture of that, launched during the 100th anniversary of the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Not the 100th runnings, there were a few years that they didn't run it, but the 100th anniversary, year one was 1923. So, red, 100 on the tachymeter scale, and I'm just wondering, was this just the ultimate coincidence? Did Rolex know that Ferrari would win its first Le Mans start since 1973 and its first Le Mans victory since 1965? That's the Ferrari 499 prototype that actually took the victory. And to be perfectly honest, Ferrari red on the 100th anniversary of the 24 Hours of Le Mans on a Rolex Daytona. This is marketing going according to not plans, but dreams. That is as good as you can possibly do. If you're Rolex, you're very, very happy right now. And of course, Rolex is extremely prominent as one of the sponsors of the 24 Hours of Le Mans. I get chills just thinking about that red 100 in the year a Ferrari wins, after 50-year absence in the premier class with a factory team. And I'm not even Tifosi. I can't imagine what those guys were doing. I guarantee you there were deaths directly attributable to the parties that followed that Le Mans victory. All right, now back to the watch. Full white gold with a matching bracelet. So it's subtle here, but you can see the dial is very different. It's got those Paul Newman counters. The watch is going to be very hefty, a second display case back. This is the second Rolex Daytona to be announced for 2023 that has a sapphire display case back. The platinum is the other one. We get a new caliber 4132 that gives us a 24-hour register where the chronograph hours normally would be. Normally on a Daytona, chronograph hours is 12. On this particular watch, you get the Paul Newman design, but you also get mechanical difference as the register is now able to log all 24 hours of a 24-hour endurance event, which is cool. And you do get 7 new parts, which means the movement is also mechanically distinct. Not super distinct, but again, little changes inside add up to a new reference. This is the 4132, and it is available only on the 126-529 right now. So, I'm excited by the doors this could open because I really do think that the Daytona is ripe to become a model line. Like you've heard that the Corvette is going to become a full model line at GM, and I don't mean a Z06, a convertible, a base model. I mean they're going to talk about doing sedans and an entry-level roadster that costs maybe $40,000 and a supercar that costs $300,000, a crossover SUV, a whole bunch of things that are all going to be Corvette. Just like Ford is now expanding the world of the Mustang to include different things. And I can see a world where Rolex expands the Daytona model line the same way they've expanded the Yacht Master to include mid-sizes, 40 millimeters, 42, steel platinum, gold, Oyster flex straps, full bracelets, Yacht Master 2s, Yacht Masters, all sorts of different options what could really be considered a full model universe, not just a line of watches that are different in material and dial, something like a Submariner. No, I think the Daytona could include split-second chronographs, maybe even triple splits, because Rolex has a patent on that. I'm talking a return of the Dato Compact's Jean-Claude Killy, the use of flyback chronograph complications, all sorts of things that could fit under the Daytona banner, maybe even including a formal return of a watch labeled Daytona Le Mans, or just Cosmograph Le Mans. I think that would be perfect. So I would not be shocked if 3-4 years from now, Daytona is a full build-out with a model line diversity like the Yacht Master, only under the Daytona headline. Okay, guys, what did you think of the 24 Hours of Le Mans this year? First, Ferrari, Corvette, and Cadillac soared. Corvette entered one car against a flotilla of opposition. It was down 3 laps almost immediately with a damper that broke in the suspension, and it came back and won for the first time since 2015 for a Corvette. That's the definition of success. The ultimate underdog comeback, a single car effort, super cool. Corvette, it was a good year for American cars generally because Cadillac beat everyone except one Toyota and one Ferrari hypercar in the premier class. Their best result since an Allard J2 finished third with a Cadillac engine in 1950. Great year for Cadillac. And Ferrari, my God, I don't think you could ask much more in your comeback. I hope they don't take this as an excuse to retire with their honor satisfied. I hope they come back with a bigger, better effort next year to defend the crown. And I really think that Toyota's dominance over, well, the last couple of years from 2018 to 2022, Ferrari's win this year and the performance of Cadillac really casts a pall over all those Toyota wins from 2018 to 2022 when they basically ran unopposed by any major factory program. I think they dominated a weak era in Le Mans and they basically competed in a class of one, Toyota. So yeah, they have the trophies and flags fly forever, but I think given just a little bit of opposition from major manufacturers, they fell on their face and they haven't looked like losers since Porsche and Audi were still active in the premier class. So I think really Toyota has a lot to prove, both in the WEC Championship and next year at the 24 Hours. Finally, Hypercar and GT3. Oh my God, they're going down to 2 classes next year in WEC, and it's going to be fantastic. New manufacturers coming into GT3. There's a new Mustang GT3 that's launching. There's going to be a Ford factory effort at Le Mans. And Hypercar, a bunch of new names are coming in. Major manufacturers that are going to be participating and also selling customer cars to fill out the field. I have followed the 24 Hours, all 24 Hours live. I should have followed it live this year. I will follow it live next year, and I might even live stream every couple of hours on this channel watching the 24 Hours next year, so to be continued. All right, and dun-dun-dun-dun, let's see what else is going on. We got a lot of comments here. Rick Green saying Daytona with Milgauss Sapphire Crystal Green would be amazing. Pocket Watch Time joining in. Mike S saying the NASCAR Garage 56 entry at Le Mans was cool, and I agree. Garage 56 is an experimental entry every year. Alternative fuel, propulsion, a car from a different type of series. There was a modified NASCAR stock car, a Camaro, that was able to run the 24 Hours. And granted, it was allowed to run more or less unrestricted, so it was more competitive than it would have been with like a restrictor. But it was still fun to see something that alien out on the track running fast and sounding loud. So I hope they bring back something like that in the future. I would actually be pretty happy if you could run a stock car at Le Mans in a separate class. God knows if they can start 70 cars at Daytona, which is like 3.5 miles, you can start 70 cars at the 24-hour track, which is, 8.5. It'll come down to garage spaces, but I would love to see more like that. I think that's very cool and very American. All right, jumping into the Yacht Master. Okay, so much has changed this year. By the way, the Yacht Master, I don't know if you get what Rolex is saying here, but clearly this is a watch that can water ski. I know, not a feature you normally associate with Rolex watches, but note the total absence of a human being in that picture or skis. It is a self-propelled water skiing watch. Omega the gauntlet has been tossed. Now, in all seriousness, the Yacht Master changed an awful lot with the addition of different sizes, silicone hairsprings, the Oyster Flex strap, and now we have a full titanium watch in 42mm. We sort of saw it coming with the Ben Ainslie prototype, but I think everyone was surprised that it made it to production as quickly as it did. Remember, the Rolex Deepsea Challenge was in development for 10 years before it reached market. And at Rolex, titanium is no longer exclusive to Tudor, so I wouldn't be shocked to see other Rolex model lines introducing titanium in the future. The Yacht Master 42 is grade 5, ceramic bezel. It's got an easy link clasp. I really think that's a bit of a miss. They should have used glide lock. And at $14,050, I think it's worth the premium over the Submariner date. I really do. I think it's $11,800, I believe. No, $10,800 for a green bezel Submariner. And frankly, I think the Yacht Master just feels more special and more different. And only glide lock with the 20 millimeters of adjustment versus 5 millimeters on this would tempt me to buy a Submariner over that Yacht Master. And it's begging for an Oyster Flex. I really do think this should be where Rolex introduces the Oyster Flex strap bracelet on a watch that's not made of precious metal. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. Wrist shots, let's take a look. Neil S. of Boca Raton shares this shot of his Rolex. Oops, I think we have one of our earlier Costa Rica shots. Neil, if you're out there, there we go. I didn't mean to offend. We have one of our furry friends, and it was worth the wait. Watches and whiskers, you know I love them. Out in Boca Raton, which is the home of one of 2 South Florida watch box offices, with his GMT Master 2 and a close friend. Nate K. of South Florida, also one of our locals, celebrates Father's Day with his JLC Master 8 days. Ryan C. comes to us from Australia with something I didn't even know existed. Look a little bit closer, and you can see he's got a Watchbox monogrammed golf ball. From the category of things that surprise me, that is high on the list. Guys, Sohrab P, I should say, wears his Grand Seiko Omowatari on a custom Milanese bracelet. Sohrab, that is looking awesome. I never imagined that thing on a straight bar Milanese, but you make it work. And we've got Abdul R, a longtime viewer and supporter of the show, in the Black Forest of Germany, out in the hills with his Citizen Pro Master. Send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com to see your machine on this screen. All right, Rolex is changing before our eyes. The Sea Dweller Deepsea Challenge. It's hard to get your brain around this thing. Back in 2012, James Cameron, in his personal submersible, descended to the bottom of the Challenger Deep, which is the deepest part of the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the ocean. Now, he made a movie about this. It came out in 2014, and alongside that, there was the so-called Rolex Deepsea James Cameron, which was basically a deep-sea sea dweller with a different colored dial. It was cool, it was fun, it was lively, but it wasn't the prototype that he took with him both on his wrist and on the outside of his submersible. That watch, which was initially made in 5 copies, had begun to look by 2022 like it was going to be a prototype and a publicity stunt only. But lo and behold, completely out of sequence with watch release season, which is generally the spring, in November, Rolex launched the production version of the Deepsea Challenge. 50 millimeters, titanium, capable of diving to over 36,000 feet, 11,000 meters. Oh, and by the way, it's tested at 125% of that rated depth at Rolex, using equipment designed by Rolex and Comex. So you better believe the number on the dial is for real. It's huge. I've worn it. It's unbearably gigantic. And no, I can't pull it off. And no, it will not fit under your cuff. Even I wouldn't pretend that. This is a watch that is either the hardest of hardcore professional equipment or the ultimate party watch. And if you're Shaq, it might be the only watch that doesn't look like a boy's-sized Rolex Oyster Perpetual on your wrist. But the point is, this was so far outside of Rolex's comfort zone, and it was the first titanium full Rolex watch ever, so it challenged our conception of what Rolex could be. Also, the Sky Dweller Annual Calendar GMT is no longer the most interesting watch in the Rolex catalog. This monster is. And it's part of a long tradition of ultra-niche Rolex watches. You got to realize they don't always aim for the meat of the market. Because they're a foundation and they're privately held, sometimes they just do what they think is cool. And let's go back to the 2007 Yacht Master 2. Was the world crying out for programmable memory, fly back, fly forward, countdown, regatta timer, retrograde? It's all of those things, and the answer is no. No one was asking for this. It's always been a niche product, and it remains that to this day. Didn't stop Rolex from launching it as the most complicated Rolex ever made, and it holds that title to this day in 2023. This is something they did unprompted without any push or pull from the market. They just thought it was neat. 1971. Was the market really crying out for a watch designed for cave explorers? No, I don't think that anyone was asking for a Cave Explorer watch back in 1971, but we're all glad that the Explorer 2 was born as a result. Or 1954 with the Rolex 6556 TrueBeat. I don't think anyone was demanding a crosshair dial deadbeat second Rolex doctor's watch, but Rolex thought it would be neat to get into that space, so they developed a dedicated caliber 1040 to do exactly that. Again, all things that Rolex did on its own initiative for a vanishingly thin sliver of the watch buying public, which is why, in light of the Deepsea challenge, we have to conclude that watch is very much part of Rolex tradition, but also a sign that anything can happen from here on. Also, is anyone surprised by just how low profile the Submariner has been this year, the 70th anniversary of the Rolex Submariner? It's almost strange to leave the Sub to the end of this segment. It was all new for 2020, which means the model redesign is still fairly fresh, but the Sub bubble, at least in terms of the aftermarket, seems like it's basically deflated at this point, especially if you want a no date. There was a time when Rolex was the Submariner, and I used to say that if Rolex was the best known watch in the world, then the Submariner was the best known watch model, and probably the best known single watch on Earth. And let's just face it, now, if anything, at least in terms of buzz online, which is where the watch world seems to exist these days, it's probably the third child behind the Daytona and the GMT. Why? Can anyone explain to me how the Sub lost its cool? The 23 Daytona models had a suitable 60th anniversary blowout of news and revisions. Platinum with a display caseback, a new Rolex Le Mans with a 24-hour Paul Newman dial. That feels like an anniversary year for a signature model. Well, the Sub's even older, 70 years this year, and arguably, at least historically speaking, more important to Rolex than the Daytona. So I predict a big finish to 2023 for the Submariner. Look at Rolex's out-of-phase launches since Baselworld. Crazy things could come out in September, October, November, December, and I would be shocked if we don't see some crazy Submariners in the second half of this year. I would say 50-50 that we see some sort of platinum, ice blue dial, chocolate ceramic bezel, Rolex Submariner for the 70th anniversary. I think we might even see a display caseback, and I really think it would be very cool if Rolex makes this a Submariner, not a Submariner date, in tribute to the 1953 original. I think there is also a smaller chance maybe that we see a full rose gold Submariner, something that's never existed up to this point, with a green dial and a green bezel. That would be very special. And again, I really think for good measure, Rolex should think about making it a no date. Technically, there are only Submariners and Submariner dates. There's no such thing as a no date. We use that term, but I mean, let's make it a Submariner and make it very special. Do it for just 1 year and make it something people will covet in perpetuity. All right, let's see what you guys are saying right here. Fries with Mayo. Had the pleasure to attend Le Mans. NASCAR Blue was very noisy. We have Brick Lane saying the GTR is also dead here in the UK. No more new car sales. That's sad, but I suspect we'll see some sort of car that's a follow-up to the GTR. And I don't necessarily think it's bad if that's an EV of some kind, because the GTR was already a highly computerized car. And while you could do things with the exhaust, the V6 engine wasn't exactly sonorous. So I'm totally cool with a ballistic GTR that hands Tesla its lunch and does it with electronic propulsion. We have Justin D saying, Tim, I think you should do a show on Panerai. I think their popularity is coming back on the pre-owned market, especially Radiomers. I might. That's where Watch You Want started, and I got my start with Watch You Want. Okay, we've got Narrow WC Ross joining in from Kuwait. Thank you for staying up super late in the Persian Gulf. Perpetual 1908, guys. The problem isn't that the Perpetual 1908, it's a bad effort. It's that it's only an okay one. I don't think anyone gets hot flashes looking at this thing. 39 millimeters in white, rose, or yellow gold. Some combos are better looking than others, and I'll be open about that. That dark dial with yellow gold's pretty hot. But is it red hot? No, it's not. The open caseback and the standard silicone hairspring are nice because that's still unusual equipment by Rolex standards, but it doesn't set this apart from anything else in its price point, especially when the competition is Audemars Piguet, JLC, Vacheron, Glasuta Original. You got to do better than this. And I would also say the 1908, it feels a lot like the old Cellini. You look at these two things side by side, and you take a look at one of the previous Cellini models, it feels like the old Cellini. I don't feel like there was a revolution here. And I might even call this in favor of the Cellini based on dial detail, which I think the old watch did a little bit better. The 1908 is a competent watch with a formal take on an Explorer dial, which is kind of fun, but if you want a formal Rolex to wear with a suit, why not just get the Explorer instead? A core model Rolex with real history, and when has it ever not been acceptable to wear an Explorer with a suit? If you want a formal Rolex and you want an Explorer dial, true, you can turn it inverse or you can turn it obverse, but either way, to me, this is the one to own if you want your tri-Arabics on a black dial Rolex for formal attire. For most Rolex buyers, dress watch still means a Datejust or a Date-8, and they're not going to seriously consider the 1908. Especially when you can have a Datejust in steel and not pay for precious metal. Now, if Rolex were to do crazy things and break the mold, this stepchild dress watch program would be the best place to deploy what an economist might call extraordinary measures. We'll talk about what those might be in a moment. But first, viewer wrist shots number 4, your analog on my digital. Kasim H is in Karachi, Pakistan with his Cartier Santos Middle East Limited Edition. Very, very sharp. That might be my favorite shot of the night. Josh P of Canada memorializes F1 Glory and his Tissot PRX. Jimmy Y takes in a spectacular looking lobster roll. They really went heavy on the meat and low on the mayo there with his Panerai Submersible Bronzo PAM 1074. And Loic C of New York City joins Sherlock the Cat in mutual appreciation of his Tudor Black Bay. We have Saul C of Austin, Texas with the only Rolex I'll ever need, bringing out the best colors of the Z Blue. Send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com to see your wrist on my list. Okay, what's going on in the box? We got Abdul, greetings from Edinburgh tonight. Interesting. He usually joins me from Egypt or Germany. And we got Miroslav saying, only dress watch Rolex can make work is some kind of King Midas reissue. Ooh, I like that. I do like that. And Justin D, hey Tim, why doesn't anyone ever talk about the Datejust? Probably the most distinct Rolex ever. I will do that in the future. And Chit Chat is joining us, staying up late in the UK. All right. What is missing from Rolex's changing face? Well, let's go with autologerie. Let's talk about craft arts. Currently, handmade Rolex craft arts includes gem setting only. That's all done traditionally by hand with flames and the same tools you would see in the 19th century. But historically, Rolex also did enameling, cloisonné, and things that were very much like gem setting in terms of their volume and the amount of manual dexterity and experience and craft art apprenticeship involved in setting up that sort of shop. Like, these are the kind of arts that still exist in the industry, but not at Rolex anymore. The thing is, Rolex has a history of them, and it would be wonderful to reestablish them now that Rolex is working on an individual watchcraft basis with its restoration studio. Once you're reassembling bracelets link by link, and you're restoring case bevels, I think it's time to start thinking about creating watches that are produced using miniature painting, using cloisonné, using marquetry, enameling cases and not just dials, engraving cases. I think there's room at a very low volume basis to do that. If you're going to restore, you've already committed to low volume and people who have very specialized skills. I think expanding that just a little bit to put out a few watches like this, 1940s, 1950s stuff right here, I think that would really expand the view that Rolex is not just the best known name in watches, but the ultimate authority in watch quality. I would also say that movement decoration, Rolex invites this challenge now that it is building watches with display casebacks. Les Artisans de Genève does all sorts of hand finishing, skeletonization, manual conversions of automatic Rolex movements. They're doing that right now. I think Rolex could steal their lunch and take that market by bringing those skills and those styles in-house. And I think with display casebacks, it's time. Complications. Historically, Rolex had flybacks, split seconds, calendar chronographs, moon phases, deadbeat seconds. I'd like to see this again. These are ripe for revival. There's definitely a market for that kind of Rolex watch. Rolex doesn't need to chase Omega into the world of tourbillon and minute repeater. They don't need to make a huge splash. They can stick with brand-appropriate complications that have precedent in Rolex history. Imagine a Rolex Le Mans with a flyback split second, or a Submariner with a single 60-minute hand slow chronograph. How cool would that be? Okay, Oyster Flex on steel and titanium watches. There we go. We've got the white gold Yacht Master in 42mm. I would love to see the Oyster Flex, but without the precious metal premium. I would even say a QR bracelet system would be ideal. Maybe Rolex wants to protect its full bracelet Submariner or Yacht Master steel. That's fine. Make people pay for the bracelet, but include a quick release system and an accessory strap so we can swap and change the look and the feel. You can still sell a full bracelet watch, but include the hardware that allows us to switch and decide which way to wear it. Glide lock. I'd like to see it on every bracelet. 20mm on the dive watch is fine, but 10 or 12 like you get on the Yacht Master 42, that would be ideal on every Rolex watch that has the Easy Link system now. You don't need the full extension that you get on the diver. Let's keep that exclusive to divers, but having more adjustability than Easy Link would really improve the quality, because I know no one is using a strap tool to change the anchor point of their bracelets now. So if you include the glide lock system, you give people adjustability that doesn't require some sort of a tool, and you give them more adjustability than Easy Link. Luxury electronic watches. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. Bring it back the way it started, as a flagship that's one of the most expensive offerings in the collection. Now, I'm not a big fan of Elon Musk personally, but he's a sharp marketer who knows how to frame his pitch and make his product appealing. Musk understood that the only way to make buyers take electric cars seriously was to make them fast, exclusive, glamorous, and aspirational. Previously, manufacturers would just take their cheapest subcompact hatchback and they'd stuff a battery onto the bottom. The result was a car no one wanted to buy. When it became cool, people would pay a premium, and that launched the entire genre of mainstream electric cars, right down to the affordable stuff you can buy today from Chevrolet or Hyundai. Back in 1970, the Rolex Texan was a flagship watch, the most expensive watch they sold, and a limited edition of 1,000 pieces. It was very prestigious, and so was the Oyster Quartz Day-Date that followed it. Rolex should re-enter this space with an exclusive quartz chronometer or even a self-contained atomic clock for the wrist. They have patents right now already on a self-contained Raman effect atomic clock wristwatch, not a radio watch that receives a signal from another atomic clock, a self-contained atomic clock. That would put Rolex at the forefront of wristwatch horology and also give them an offering that is high-tech, bleeding-edge, electronic, and luxury. I would say this allows the introduction of functions like superior accuracy, under-dial solar cells, firmware upgrades, and improve-as-you-go additions, just like Musk's Teslas, that allow the watch to get better the longer you own it. These are not possible with a purely mechanical watch. It would be like a wrist-borne breguet sympathique. Think about it. You could pair an electronic system that winds and regulates a mechanical Rolex movement inside of one watch. Ressence tried this with the Type 2, the E-Crown, but lacked the resources to launch it effectively. Urwerk has attempted to achieve this with the parallel Mech-Tech AMC, where you have a watch that goes into an atomic clock that sets and winds it. I think Rolex could put both in one case and give you both the bleeding edge tech and a mechanical watch, and I would love to see that. Guys, thanks to everyone. Thanks to Sid. He did a fantastic job. This show is not easy to cast, and he really improved on the fly. So thank you to Sid. Thanks to you guys. Check out the Watchbox app, the coolest way to watch every Watchbox feature, and my short form reviews. Until next time, time out, Tim out. Thanks for logging on.